All right. So we are going to go to chapter 12 today. And chapter 12 is going to be our last chapter for this semester. And then in 2 weeks, well, we're off the next 2 weeks. And then on July 20th, we'll be back to continue with chapter 12. I don't think I'm going to get all the way through it. But as you can see in the chart I have up there are 22 chapters. And so we're about in the middle of chapter 12. So we have plenty of material to cover next semester and probably the semester after that. So it usually takes about a year to go through the course, although you can come in at any point. And the book has a basic chronology. It is chronological overall. However, there's a number of chapters, and we're kind of coming into those chapters now. A number of chapters where I call it parenthetical. In other words, they're kind of pulled out of the timeline, and God focuses on a particular aspect of something in the timeline. So that's what we're going to see in 12 as we look through 12. On the bottom here, I have A, B, and C. We're always going to remember that Revelation is a series of visions within the overall vision, but there's three essential points that anchor us. Point A is the beginning of the 7 years. B is the middle of the 7 years, the beginning of the Great Tribulation. And then C is the finale, if you will, of the 7 years, Armageddon. So at point A in the beginning, we have the rapture. John's taken to heaven as a type in Revelation chapter 4:1. And then there's a scene in heaven in 4 and 5, but it's kind of it's in the heavenly time, which means no time. It's hard for us to understand, but heaven is an infinite time, although God is in time at all times. Too much time in that. He sees everything. He knows the end from the beginning, but he also is timeless at the same time. So it's almost impossible for we earthlings to understand that. He's not an earthling. We're the creatures. He's the creator. So he's way beyond what we can imagine or think. I think that's the biggest problem with atheists and agnostics is the God that they are rejecting is not the God of the Bible. They think of God as sort of like the ancient Greeks did, like the God is just a Superman, a man on steroids is God. That's not God. God is so much way beyond it that in their minds, when they question the Bible and they point out something and say, "Oh, I couldn't serve a God like that," that's because the God they're imagining is not the biblical God. It's some God they've conjured up in their head, probably from Hollywood. I think George Burns, the old comedian, played God at one point. And I've seen a number of Hollywood depictions, which mostly comedies. But God is like Morgan Freeman. I think was one of the gods. He did a good job, but it's not. That's not God. He's not an elderly man, with a white beard. That's not how that works. We have all kinds of images in our brains, and not just us. Down through time, if you look at the paintings from the Middle Ages, they've depicted, or Leonardo da Vinci, they have paintings where, they tried to depict what God looks like. And none of them really capture God because God is way beyond anything they can think or imagine. But the average person gets exposed to those graphics, those icons, those pictures, and thinks, "Oh, that's God." Well, I reject that because that they're rejecting a God that's not the God. So I think most people, if they had a picture of the real God, they wouldn't be so quick to reject him. So that's part of why we're studying Revelation. John has given us, is giving us, and continues to give us in the Revelation a portrait of God, of Jesus, the resurrected Christ, the risen Christ. So in chapter 1, we see what he really looks like. And he's extremely powerful. You can barely even grasp through the verbiage used as what Jesus looks like now. I mean, eyes like fire, like flaming fire. I haven't seen that. Well, maybe in some of these superhero movies, but I mean, in reality, in a real situation, no one's seen that. John did, and he wrote it down. So as we come through the books, we come to chapter 6, the beginning of the tribulation, and the seals. There's 6 seals. They're in time, and that they're chronological. And then we have chapter 8. We skip over 7, which was a parenthetical, looking at just 144,000 martyrs. And then we have chapter 8, which starts with the seventh trumpet, and seventh seal, excuse me, seventh seal in the beginning of the trumpets. So 8 and 9 of the trumpets, that's in time. That's why I have the solid red line of the chapter numbers. Up beneath it is in time, and above it is parenthetical, mostly out of time. Like I said, it's more like God focusing on a particular aspect of the tribulation. So that's what we're going to be looking at. And today we're going to go into chapter 12. And chapter 12 is one of those parentheticals in the sense that he's focusing on the woman and the dragon. And here they are. Um, I had AI generate this for me with one sentence. Basically, I just said, I want create an image of a woman like in Revelation chapter 12. And I may have given it a couple of more details, and it made this just like that. It's amazing. And this other one is, okay, show me a devil being thrown out of heaven in chapter 12, and it made this one. It still is not totally accurate. I think it has 2 horns on its head. One of them appears to have come off, and it has a weird looking tail. Well, nowhere in Scripture does it say the devil has horns, 2 horns in that sense. I mean, the artist's depiction. It talks about the false prophet having 2 horns, and they have a meaning. But anyway, and the devil doesn't have a tail, as far as we know. I'm not sure where they got that from, but every depiction you see of a devil is not a biblical depiction. At least I haven't seen one that's accurate. So, also he can appear as an angel of light. So, he could very well be evident in the world today. But just to clarify that, he is the highest ranking super general of evil, and he doesn't really come down to earth and deal with people. Oh, the devil made me do it. No, the devil didn't make you do it. You are not important to the devil. I hate to disillusion you, but you and I are not important to the devil. He's not coming down for a special mission to deal with a buck private in the army of God. That's not how it works. So I can think of a few examples where he did come down. One is in the temptation of Jesus, right? He was there. And also it says that he entered into Judas the night he betrayed Christ. So, there are times, and although it doesn't say the devil, Paul talks about a thorn in his side, a messenger from Satan, not Satan, but an emissary, which was sent from the devil. So, and Paul was the greatest Christian of all time. Christ was not a Christian. Okay. In other words, I don't know how, it's like we follow Christ, so we're Christians in the sense we're following Christ, but Christ is not the first Christian. Christ is God. Christians are not God, right? In other words, you might be a great Christian. Paul was the greatest of all time, but he was not God. We don't worship Paul. So Christ showed us the way. He's the beginning of all things Christian, but he's way above and beyond. That's another mistake people make is they try to make Jesus a great teacher or a wise man, and they try to paint him as just another man that was really smart, Like Einstein was smart about atomic bombs, right? And physics. So Jesus was really smart about religious stuff. He was just another genius. And that's the lie the new age teaches. Even when I got my first degree at University of Miami in comparative religion and philosophies, they presented Christ as just another great teacher. Of course, they're all lost. They're all worldly people there at that time. I'm sure they still are. But that's the way most universities are. They're just going to, it's like a smorgasbord of theology. Oh, you want to be a Buddhist? Great. There's many ways to God. I want to be a Taoist. Taoism's good. Yin yang. I see the symbol everywhere. It must be good. And I can go down all the things I learned, and it's like they're all false. And then Jesus, oh, he's another way. He's an avatar. That's what the Hindus like to say. Of course, there's that movie, but the meaning of avatar is a God coming down in human form. That's the form. That's Hinduism. So yeah, so Jesus, Krishna was an avatar. Jesus is an avatar. He embodied the cosmic wisdom. All the universal mind was in Jesus, and he was teaching us a greater way, another way. But then Muhammad came along and he's teaching us even better way. Muhammad's an avatar, but he's the latest, so he must be the best. You can see how that faulty thinking will permeate intellectuals. Intellectuals are the people that are most easily fooled. They're easily fooled because Satan just has to put a thought in there and they will grow that seed themselves. He doesn't even have to work. He'll just put a seed in there and leave. Let them have at it because their minds are so intricately and complexly, evolving to think about different intellectual concepts that they'll make their own craziness. They will have a full-blown theology. Just give them enough rope to hang themselves, and they will do that. So, I remember I studied under a lot of PhDs, supposedly really smart people, but none of them were saved because salvation has nothing to do with intellect. I mean, even someone with a what should I put it this way, a challenged intellect, someone who is maybe mentally struggling with some things can still be saved because salvation is not based on how smart you are. It's not based on how strong you are, or Arnold would be saved. I'm not sure that he is. Okay. So, but that's enough on that. I'm just diverging somewhat, but it all has to do with Satan and the fall of Satan. So now we go into the first verse of Revelation 12, and this has to do with, as we can see in the graphic, a pregnant woman and a great dragon. Again, this is an artist's depiction. You can't go by artist depictions, but they're interesting graphic to look at. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. That's crazy. How can we understand this? There's no way we can understand what this is. Oh, that's right. Way back in Genesis, it tells us who that is. And this is true of almost everything in Revelation. The symbols occur somewhere in the Old Covenant, in the Old Testament. Genesis is not part of the law, but it is part of the Old Covenant, the Tanakh, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of Moses. And so at that time, we see in Genesis 37, listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. And when he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? So this image that we find way back, which would have been, I want to say, if we use the date roughly 1500 BC, so over 1500 years earlier before the Revelation was written. This was already in effect, and the Jews had Genesis and understood this. So when we see this very strange vision of a creature and of the woman, we can understand who that is by going back. And that's how all Revelation is. There are no mysteries you can't understand in Revelation as far as the symbolism, if you go back to the Old Covenant and look it up. And she was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. The Greek word there is odio or odion, which is literally means birth pains. I think that's where we get our word odious. Something's odious, it's very painful and undesirable. Anyway, but all these, Jesus said in Matthew 24, all these are but the beginnings of the birth pangs, talking about the end times. Okay, and another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. Again, to understand this, we have to go back to Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, we, amongst other places, we see that these 7 heads have a meaning. They're world empires, and the 10 horns also have a meaning. And these meanings actually come from Daniel chapter 2. And you've probably heard of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon made. I mean, there was a dream he had, and the head was gold, and the shoulders were silver, the stomach was brass, the legs were iron, and then it got down to the 10 toes of iron and clay. But those were all the world empires before Jesus would come back. And in that same vision and the explanation, it says that this statue will rule until the stone not cut with hands comes and smashes it on the toes. Well, what happens when you smash a statue on the feet it's standing on? It goes down. So basically what that means is these are the successive Gentile empires, starting with Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar, which is where the kingdom where Daniel was at that time. All the successive Gentile empires were given in this statue. And this was before they even existed. In other words, when this vision was given, it was around, we'll just call it, 600, in the 600s BC. What happened there is that after Nebuchadnezzar was king and his empire fell, the Medians and the Persians came, the Persians and the Medes, and they conquered them, and then they were conquered by Alexander the Great, who was conquered by the Romans, and those are the successive world empires, and it's exactly what's in the statue. In other words, God predicted what these empires would be hundreds and hundreds of years before they ever existed. But now, with the benefit of history, we can look back and say, oh, yeah, this is what it was. The greatest empire was a head of gold. He was total ruler, the greatest ruler the world has seen of an earthly ruler, because he didn't divide anything up. He was the total dictator of the Babylonian Empire. And then when he came, he had the successors that defeated him. They were the shoulders and arms of silver. That's the Medes and the Persians. They had two empires that came together, but they weren't as strong as the Babylonians as far as the overall empires. And then Alexander came. He died after 3 years, and his 4 generals took over. And that's the stomach of bronze. And there's 4 muscle groups in the stomach. And so his 4 generals took over from him. And then finally, the Romans came, and their empire consisted of 2 sides, east and west. The Eastern Roman Empire and the West, those are the 2 legs. So the Eastern Empire continued on for another 1,000 years after the Roman Empire died. What should we say? Died out. So it's not so much that it was conquered from without, although many pagans came against it. It was conquered because it was rotten inside. It dissolved from within. So the whole idea here is that we can understand these 7 heads, although in the statue, they're given in the different form, the form of the different parts of the statue. The 7 heads or powers are given here as heads, but they're the same thing. It's God often does that. The meaning of the vision will be given in different terms. So he even did that in the book of Daniel, where the Media-Persian Empire was likened unto a bear, and Alexander was likened unto a leopard, and then the Roman Empire was likened unto a strange beast. So you can find that in Daniel. So anyway, he'll give things in different viewpoints, different symbolisms, so we can get even a better understanding of them. And it says in verse 13:1, and I saw a beast rise out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads. and 7 diadems, just to show you that after chapter 12, this is reiterated in chapter 13. And then it's also found in chapter 17, we're going to get to in a few weeks. And he carried me away into the spirit. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. So this symbolism continues throughout the book of Revelation. And as I mentioned, we have the 7 empires, which correspond here to the 7 heads. And in this case, it's going back to the beginning. When Daniel had his vision, the first two empires, Egyptian and Assyrian, which were way in the past, had already gone away. So he only dealt, and God gave him the vision of the Babylonian onward. But from the beginning, if you look at all of the worldwide empires, of course, when I say worldwide, from God's perspective, he's always centering on Israel and the land of Israel. So you don't find anything mentioned about the Han Dynasty or China or anything going on somewhere else, because they have nothing to do with God's plan directly. They will at the end times. But so that's why when we have the 7, we were really looking at the Middle Eastern and African and European countries and empires. I'd say African because Egypt was one of the first and most powerful empires. And you see things on the History Channel and other channels constantly about Egypt and King Tut. Man, I think we had a song at one point about King Tut. It was a funny thing. But at any rate, that's years ago. So the idea is that everybody knows about Egyptian things in some way or another, either in school or through the media. So the Egyptian Empire was the first, worldwide empire in a sense of the Mediterranean and the areas surrounding Israel. And then the Assyrians came along, and the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. And then finally, the Babylonians came along and took Daniel and his friends to the Babylonian headquarters, if you will. So the Babylonians where Daniel starts. And then the Medo-Persians, they allowed the Jews to go back and rebuild the temple. And then the Greek Empire is where we have the ruling powers of the Greek Empire, and they were the 5th empire, the 5th horn, the 5th heads, and the 5th head was the Greek, and they ruled over what we call the overall Palestinian area, Palestine, and then we have the Romans, and most of us are very familiar with the Romans because when you watch a Bible movie, most of the time, who are the enemies, the ones the Jews want to get rid of, the ones who have conquered them and controlling them? It's the Romans from the time of Christ. So we're familiar with that, and that's 6, but there's 7 heads. There we have the problem. So these are 6 historically verified empires, the 6 heads, but it says there's a 7th head coming. It's going to have 10 horns. So then we have to look at the statue again, amongst other biblical eschatology, and what we see is that 10 horns correspond to the 10 toes. The 10 toes, which are the 10 horns on the final kingdom that's coming, are going to be the kingdom ruled by Antichrist. And his kingdom will be destroyed by Jesus Christ when he returns, and there'll be no more Gentile ruling. So some people talk about the times of the Gentiles. They came to an end, 1948, whenever, but none of that's accurate, because it's not until Jesus comes back and crushes the 10 toes that the Gentile kingdoms will be over. Okay, so in fact, we saw last week in chapter 11 that there will be a rebuilt temple, and the Gentiles are going to tread underfoot for 3.5 years. The times of the Gentiles don't come to an end until the very end of the tribulation. So that's when the times of the Gentiles come to an end. Because the difference is times of the Gentiles means the Gentiles are governing the world. Actually, Satan is through them. And then in the very end of the tribulation, the last part of the tribulation, Armageddon, Jesus comes back, sets up his kingdom, and he rules. So you either have Gentiles ruling or Jesus ruling, but you can't have both. That's why God delineates it like this and makes it clear. So the coming one world empire is going to consist of 10 horns, and horns is a symbol in the prophetic scripture of ruling powers. So there's going to be 10 ruling powers when the Antichrist fully comes, the full-blown Antichrist, 666 and all that. So what might that be? Um, I've come to believe, um, other than what I did, years ago, it was taught that the ten horns was the revived Roman Empire, and there were nations in Europe. I don't believe that anymore, because I think, as we get closer, God reveals and gives us more illumination. First of all, because the Antichrist kingdom will be worldwide. The European kingdoms, even whether it was the African kingdom, Middle East, or the European kingdoms that we've known, they are not worldwide. You could say that the British Empire, in a sense, had a worldwide kingdom, but not really. The sun never set. They had a lot of colonies all over the world, but it wasn't a worldwide kingdom. But this is going to be a worldwide kingdom. In other words, there's not a country, nation, or people that won't be under the control of the Antichrist. So it seems logical, looking at what's happening now and the developments, that these 10 toes, these 10 horns, are actually geographic groupings of peoples and nations. And I think we're seeing the beginning of that in trade. It's probably economically it's going to happen first. So they had something called NAFTA. They've relabeled it now. But one of the first groupings that we're seeing, which is real, it's happening now and has been happening for a number of years, is the North American Treaty, Economic Treaty Organization. So what they have is Canada, United States, and Mexico. And I'm sure it may enlarge to some of the Central American nations, maybe even the Caribbean nations. So that would be one of the spheres. In other words, and you might have South America might be a second sphere, a second horn. Then you might have, like I said, Greenland and Europe, that's the third one. Africa is so gigantic, it's probably North Africa may have one. South Africa has one. Russia could become one. All this is conjecture, but I'm saying you could divide up the whole world into groupings. In other words, super states, if you will. So for ruling purposes, apparently the Antichrist is going to have 10 governors, one governor over each of these regions of the world. And so that's how he's going to govern from what we can see in the scripture. Those would correspond to the 10 toes. The last earthly Gentile human government on earth will be like this. It'll be a worldwide government. Again, that's never happened. In the history of the world, there's never been a worldwide government. Okay, let's go a little bit further and look at the woman and the dragon. A little bit more information here. The dragon is going to sweep 1/3 of the stars from heaven. And I guess we could say that's probably where some of them might get the idea of a tail. It says his tail. I'm not sure. I mean, if you want to believe he has a tail, that's fine. I think that's more of a alliteration, more of a symbolic way of because I don't think the devil has some kind of huge long tail that would take millions of angels and sweep them around. You know what I'm saying? I love the Jurassic Park movies, and you see the giant sauropods like the thunder lizards. And when they walk, the whole theater goes boom, boom. So, and they have a tail that's gigantic, as actually it's mentioned in Job. I believe that's the Leviathan. He says his tail is like a cedar. It's like the biggest tree you can think of. And that's how it is on that screen. If you look at the tail, it's like gigantic. Well, that tail could sweep a bunch of lesser dinosaurs away by him swatting them with his tail. But this is way beyond anything like that. So I don't think that's what it is. If you feel happy about having your devil with a tail, by all means, pin the tail on the devil. I think, did we play that as a kid? I don't remember. Pin the tail on the devil. I don't think so. At least not where I was playing. But at any rate, it gives us the idea here that Lucifer may have been, I think this is accurate, one of three archangels. And the reason that many scholars believe this and interpreters is because there's only two archangels mentioned in the New Testament, Michael and Gabriel. I should say Old Testament too, because Gabriel and Michael were seen in the Old Covenant. So, I've heard in some of the additional books, maybe it's Apocrypha, but some of the older Jewish literatures, they have books that list Raphael and a lot of them end in L, probably because L means God. So, but anyway, in fact, I work with a guy named Raphael. He's a Hispanic guy, and it's a name that has come down. Through time and still is being used, but it's scripturally in our canon, our actual certified Bible stamped authority of the Bible, we only have two, Michael and Gabriel. So if it's true that there were three archangels originally, Lucifer, who fell, his name was changed, Michael and Gabriel, and then it does make sense when it says a third of the stars from heaven cast down with him. So it's very possible that they were arranged. I've heard this also. It makes sense. God's orderly. That the angels were arranged in military ranking. In other words, so these are the top generals, and underneath each of them, they have their own, Army, Navy, and Air Force, whatever. So it's very possible. And it's also very possible that when Satan fell, the guys, not the guys, the angelic beings he was in charge of, which of course became the fallen angels, went with him. Very possible. So there's a lot of people that think that's what this is. And I wouldn't argue with that. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. This is symbolism talking about the nation of Israel and Mary, of course, who had the Christ child, but it's also she's representative of the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel was chosen. The main purpose was so that Christ would come to the earth. In other words, when you look back, you say, well, what's the purpose of the old covenant? And you read through it all. We have a lot of great history, and Goliath did certain things, and David, and you go down through the conquest of Jericho, and there's a lot of good information there. It's all historically accurate, but sometimes you lose the forest for the trees there. The whole purpose of it is the prediction that God gave in Genesis 3:15 that he was going to send a Messiah who was going to crush Satan. So that's exactly what the purpose was, and the purpose was that through one man, Abraham, he would choose a people that through those people and through a particular line, ultimately the tribe of Judah, the ruling tribe, that the king, the ultimate king, would come. So the whole purpose of everything was prophetic. The whole covenant, old covenant, is centered in prophecy, and it's all prophecy. All prophecy is about Christ. So ultimately, the coming of Christ was the purpose of everything that happened in the old covenant. It's easy to get lost with the begats, but even the begats are important because, as in Luke and Matthew, they listed one from Joseph and one from Mary. They had to go back to Adam and go all the way back down and show that each of them was in the lineage as predicted. So that's why we have all the begats. It's not to confuse us and bore us and put us to sleep. Although if you want to read them, it's a good way to go to sleep. So, but that's not really the purpose. So the whole purpose of it is the child, the woman. Of course, the woman would be Israel in our image. Remember the image of the 12 stars and all that, which we just talked about. That woman is the image of Israel, Israel being the chosen people. And then the whole purpose of Israel was to have a chosen people, but choose them so that they would be the vehicle for the birth of Christ. So becoming a Messiah is the whole purpose of all of that. And so the devil knew that. He's not real bright. Well, I shouldn't say that. He's spiritually dull, but intellectually bright. He's smarter than any person, but spiritually, he has a tragic flaw. So he's ready to destroy the Christ. And if you remember, right off the bat, King Herod, the devil inspired him, go and kill him. And all through Christ's life, they were trying to kill him. And then he'd say things like, "My time has not yet come. No man can take my life." So in other words, he lived his life in total accordance with God's will, and at the appointed time, he surrendered his life. The devil never took his life. The devil arranged the mechanism, if you will. He inspired the Jewish leaders and the Romans, and but Jesus was in total control. So that's where the symbolism is. The woman gave birth to the man child, which is a messianic phraseology symbol. And just to give us a little picture here, and of course we're going to pick it up next semester, but just to keep in mind that we have above the middle line, we have the heavens. God's heaven is in third heaven. I believe it's in a different dimension. It has to be. In other words, you can get in a spaceship and travel forever. You'll never come to heaven. He doesn't exist on the planet. He doesn't exist in this universe. He's way beyond. He made the universe. The universe is not where he lives. He lives in all of it. But I'm saying you can't limit him. That's problem of these cosmologists and astronomers that, oh, I looked out there and I can't find God anywhere. Of course, you're never going to find God out there. That comes from people's imagination, misinformation, because he's not out there. He's in a whole different dimension. But at any rate, so the second heaven is the cosmos. Carl Sagan was a big astronomer, physicist back when, and he had a series on the cosmos. But that's just the natural universe. And they're learning now that they're finding with the James Webb Telescope, the latest and greatest, they're looking way further beyond anything they've ever seen, and they're seeing things they don't even understand how they can exist. That's because they don't really know anything. They think they know a lot of things, but they don't. It's in some areas like physics, they're starting to almost get the idea of what God can do and what God has made. But in general, they're educated morons, idiots. I say that respectfully. They're great intellects and great students, and I mean, they're way beyond me. But I'm just saying, no man is even close to being as smart as God is. And when they think they're smarter than God, that's what happens. When you reject God, what you're really saying is, I'm smarter than God. I want to be my own God. And who was the original creature that said, I want to be my own God? Satan, because he was super smart, smarter than anybody. He may have been smarter than the other angels. So, but intellectualism is not going to save you. If that were true, all the PhDs would be saved, but it's just the opposite. Most of them aren't saved because they think they're smarter than God. Boy, the Bible talks about that. The beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. They have no fear of the Lord, so they're not really that bright. They're intellectually bright, but they're not spiritually bright. They're spiritually dull. So I beat up on them enough. I have several degrees. I mean, I went through education, so I have a little idea what I'm talking about. I didn't get my PhD, although they wanted me to go get it because it would have taken another 4 years, and I had a wife and babies, and it wasn't going to happen. It was just too much. That's what happens when you start late in life and try to go through the educational process. Enough about that. At any rate, so then the Earth's atmosphere is the first heaven. Most people would, talk about that. What's happening in the heavens today? Oh, we have some rainstorms coming. Look up in the heaven, look up in the clouds. So there's the earthly atmosphere, the universe, and then there's where God dwells that no man can see. No man has been there and lived and come back except for a few. And one of those guys, I think, was Paul. He says, I know a man, like 13 years ago. He seems to have gone to heaven. I'm sure he did. But if you go to heaven and come back, it's because God took you there and God wanted you to come back, right? You don't just get there. So if you're waiting on the super Star Trek type light ship to get you there, I got some good news. You don't need that. That's nonsense. But anyway, so hell, we've talked about hell in the past. And I'm not going to go too far into it, just to say Jesus taught us about torments in Abraham's bosom and the gulf fixed in between. And Tartarus is where the fallen angels went. And we have that mentioned in the New Testament epistles. And then Gehenna is the everlasting lake of fire, which is in a totally different place. The location is not mentioned. But all that's to say, Satan and his fallen angels and the demons have never been in hell. And I challenge you, if you think they have, to go back and read the story of the pigs, where Jesus cast a legion out of the crazy man. And what did the pigs say? Don't send us to where we're supposed to go before our time. So he sent him in the pig. He couldn't send them to hell because demons never been in hell. They can't go to heaven either because they're not created by God. So I've got a whole understanding of that. I'm just saying fallen angels, except for those locked up in Tartarus, who were the guys that polluted the earth, angels have never been in hell. All this hell is reserved for the devil and for his minions. It says that somewhere. Somewhere it does say that hell is reserved for the devil and his minions. Hell being this whole underworld. Hades, it just means underworld, but all these compartments. So we've got a lot to go, a lot further to go, and I think I will finish the rest of this chapter when we come back on July 20th. And we're just getting into the really good part. We're going to, as when I finish that, we're going to strictly the mid-trib part in the Antichrist, chapter 13, is usually everybody's favorite. The Antichrist, false prophet, 666, and when it gets really bad. So I shouldn't say it's favorite. People are just interested in that. Even the world fixates on that, you know. I see 666 in movies. It has nothing to do with the Bible, but they know what that is, you know. And the word Armageddon is everywhere. There's a movie called Armageddon. It's talking about an asteroid coming and hitting the earth, right? But it's used loosely everywhere. So the world has a general understanding. They don't understand the Bible, but that's how it is. Everybody seems to have some knowledge of this end time scenario. Honey, will you wrap us up?